Dearest Julie, it has been 1 month and 11 days since I first set out after my most recent query, the elusive altered 251 lick. Despite continued diligent practice at a variety of tempos in all 12 keys, I am still yet to land the abomination in an organic fashion during a live performance. The other members of my quartet have grown weary of my incessant practicing in soundcheck and during our set breaks. I fear that by the passing of the new year, no musician will share the stage with me, regardless of the remittance provided. While my commitment is steadfast, I can't help but wonder if this continued devotion to this angular but melodic line is a sign of genius or madness. Yours in swing, Shawn. Now, I hope this isn't you, but if you have spent any amount of time practicing improvisation, you have probably had this experience that no matter how much you practice a certain lick or harmonic idea or rhythmic idea, it just won't come out in your playing in a natural way. Today, we are going to break down a couple of approaches to deal with this particular challenge and also look at some ways we can evaluate the stuff we're practicing to know maybe it's time to just move on. What's up, everyone? Shawn Bell here. Thanks for joining me this week. Today's content comes to you courtesy of a question that I got on a video a couple of weeks ago. The comment goes like this: how do I know if I've practiced a lick enough? I mean, like for me, usually I can get to the point where if I think about the lick, I can play it, but it doesn't really come out just when I'm playing naturally or performing. I've been under the assumption that once I can play in all 12 keys quickly, I should just move on. Normally it takes me around a week to get to this point if it's not that complex. This is a really great question, and I think it gets at one of the most challenging things for us to do in the practice room. Regardless of what we're working on, it could be improvisation, it could be technique, it could be prepping classical material for that matter. Knowing when you have sort of like squeezed all the improvement out of something and that if you continue to work on it, you're actually just wasting time in the practice room is a really difficult balance to strike. Obviously, all of us want to play at a really high level, but there does come a point where it is time to move on. So we're going to look at some approaches today and figure out how to find that balance and maybe some things that we can do to make sure we're really getting every little ounce of improvement out of our practice. So the first thing I like to do when I am feeling maybe a little bit stuck or not sure if it is time to move on, or maybe there's something I'm working on that's not really like coming out in my playing in the way I want it to, is I make sure that I can sing whatever I'm working on. Singing is the most important practice tool that you have at your disposal. It is almost like a magic fix-all for so many of our problems as players. I cannot think of a time when in my own practice or when working with students that if we stop on a difficult passage, we sing it a couple times, we go back to the horn, it is not better. It really solves so many of the issues that we face. Maybe you're struggling on a passage in an etude. Da 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 da. Maybe you're struggling to move an idea through a couple different keys. Da 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 do dot. Da da do da do dot. Da 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 do dot. Or maybe there's a challenging technical passage that you just can't quite get under your fingers. Da 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 da. I cannot think of a concept that you can execute on your horn that will not improve if you can sing it. Now, you don't necessarily need to be a good singer. I don't think I'm a particularly good singer. I don't really enjoy singing that much. I don't have a very developed range. I have a pretty low voice, so a lot of what I'm singing is lower than where the trombone is. But you just got to work on it if it's something that you don't really feel like you do that well or enjoy that much. You got to go slow. You got to choose your range sensibly. And you might just have to practice. About 10 or 15 years ago, because I was so bad at this, I just started practicing it more regularly, and eventually it did get better. It is just the quickest way to improve as a brass player is to use your voice. The other big thing that I like to do when I'm finding that a particular idea just won't stick and won't come out of my playing is start to make variations of that idea. Now, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, so let's just jump in right to an idea that I was working on, not super recently, but in the last year that was sort of falling into this category, that it just seemed like no matter how many times I practiced it or how much I revisited that idea over time, it just would not come out in my playing. So that is a pretty straightforward sounding 2-5-1 lick, but what's happening on the 5 chord is just something that I didn't really have in my vocabulary. I heard a colleague playing a lick like that, and I was like, I gotta work on that. And so I made this little lick out of the basic idea, and just when I was practicing, it just wouldn't come out in my playing naturally. Now, what's going on the 5 chord is really the interesting part here. The 2 chord is pretty run-of-the-mill. The 5 chord has this little sidestep thing going on where G7, this is a 2-5-1 to C major, and we have an A flat minor shape going on the G7 chord, an A flat minor 6 shape specifically. This is going to get us connected to all of the alterations on G7 and just give us some good like little colorful stuff happening and then a nice release coming out of it. But no matter how much I worked on it, I just was never finding myself playing it, even though I had command over it in all 12 keys. So after working on the lick, leaving it, working on it again, leaving it, maybe the second or third time that I was revisiting the idea, I decided, I'm going to change this a little bit and change the way I interact with this kind of core shape when I get to the 5 chord. What did I do? I simplified it. I got rid of that triplet in there. That was just sort of bogging me down a little bit, I think, in a couple keys, particularly in the upper register. It was challenging for me to execute, and I was a little more focused on execution and not really focused on, hey, am I actually hearing this shape and getting those notes, because I just couldn't play it super well in a couple of keys. So simplifying it really just like made things click in a very short amount of time. So finding a little variety with these licks is important. The first step I would take is just changing the rhythm. These are all pretty subtle changes, and some ideas are probably going to allow for a little more rhythmic variation without sort of losing the core idea. All of these I would actually say are simplifying what was originally there. Simplifying is not the only way to go, but that's what I really need to do in this case. Now, from there, maybe you keep what's going on the 5 chord the same, either the original version or one of the other rhythmic versions, and you get into it on the 2 chord in some other ways. Even though what's going on in the 5 chord is really what I was trying to work on in this case, you could also maybe think about varying what goes on there. Maybe you take the same sort of underlying principle, this sort of sidestep A flat minor over G sort of sound, and manipulate the melody shape in a couple of different ways. Not only is all this variation going to help you get better command over the actual lick you're practicing, but it's going to open up lots of other doors that you could go down. You could try some of these other licks with these little variations. It's going to give you better command over maybe the underlying concept, at least that was at play here, of like superimposing that half step up sound on a dominant chord. So variation is absolutely key if things are not sticking, because the first lick you played might not be the way you really want to hear it. You might end up hearing an idea that's similar, but a little bit more tailored to your own style of playing if you give yourself a chance to work a concept in lots of different ways. So now we can bring it all the way back to the beginning of today's lesson. When do we know it is time to move on from practicing a particular idea? So if you put in the time on the horn, it's working on the horn. You've got to evaluate, can you do some of that stuff that we talked about today? Can you sing the ideas? Can you create variations of the ideas you're working on that sound musical, and ideally create those in a spontaneous way? When you're practicing these ideas, and particularly maybe when you're sort of like cutting and pasting them into your solos in a practice sense, can you do it in a way that has great sound, great time feel? A lot of times this is really where people struggle, is when they try to cram an idea into their solos. It really stands out in relief. It doesn't sound like their own playing because their time feel really suffers. So if you can do these things, play with a great sound, great time, you can sing the ideas, but they're still not working or coming out naturally, it's probably just time to move on. Some things you have to move on from for a while. You come back to the idea later. Maybe it sticks a little bit better. Some things never really stick. And the thing that's important to remember here is it's not so much about just like every single idea that I practice has to come out in my playing, on the gig next week. Sometimes it comes out 2 weeks later. Sometimes it comes out 2 months later. And because you put in that practice time, you're going to be able to command that idea that you're hearing. But it's especially important to remember that so much of this lick practice and practicing these small phrases is about accumulating lots of different ideas. Maybe they never actually come out and you're playing in that exact way, but that accumulation and that process of learning the ideas is how we train our ear. It's how we train sort of like our internal voice as musicians as to what type of ideas that we gravitate towards. So even if they're not coming out and you're playing immediately, I wouldn't lose heart. I would still keep that process the same and just know that as long as more of the ideas that you're practicing, or at least portions of those ideas, are coming out in your playing and your playing is moving along in the right direction, you're doing the right stuff and not worrying too much if they come out exactly like you practiced it. Cool. We'll see you in the woodshed.